Hello, this is Julie Rettenberg, Zach Telke, and Richie Prestegard. Today we'll be exploring the possible correlation between changes in democracy and the number of murders per 100,000 people in Guatemala, Azerbaijan, and Mexico. At the beginning of the 20th century, Guatemala was under the control of a dictator who was in favor of wealthy landowners buying and owning coffee plantations. The Mayans felt that there was economic inequality due to the loss in their land and foreign investment was taking over strongly. In 1944, the dictatorship was overthrown and a new government was put in place to promote the interests of the Mayans and their lower class, giving them education, social security, political rights, and workers' unions. When Guatemala attempted to purchase the land for state ownership, the U.S. set up a communist scare, taking down the communist government and putting an American-backed dictator in office. In 1963, the graph shows the democracy score at -5 and jumps to -3 in 1966, where it remains until 1970 when the Mayans recognized the inequality. The oppressed Mayans were supported by the church and began to move for civil rights. The perception of democracy steadily decreases until 1980 when the genocide begins and the murder rate skyrockets. In 1980, the Guatemalan army instituted Operation Sophia, which attempted to end the uprising of the insurgents targeting the Mayan population. The army destroyed 626 villages and their crops, killed more than 200,000, and displaced more than 1.5 million. With the end of the genocide, the death toll fell, and with a new democratic government in place, the perception of democracy increased. In 1994, a new democratic government was set up and a peace agreement was signed in 1996. The perception of democracy in Guatemala steadily is increasing. However, the murder rate still remains high because of poverty, weak law enforcement and judicial systems, and a legacy of societal violence.
The spike in Azerbaijan's democracy at the end of the 1980s was due to the collapse of the Soviet Union, of which it was a member state. By the end of 1991, the Soviet Union was completely dissolved, and Azerbaijan, along with 13 other nations, gained their independence. The sudden decrease and increase in democracy in 1991 was caused by Ayaz Mutalibov being elected Communist Party boss in Azerbaijan and leading the country for a brief period of time during its transition to independence. He was unseated from his position in only a couple months, after which he fled to Russia. This ousting was caused by economic turmoil and losses due to the Armenian conflict, which I will discuss in a moment. He was replaced by Abulfaz Elkabey. The democracy score drops again for a final time during a time period when former Communist Party chief Gaidar Aliyev becomes head of parliament and soon replaces Abulfaz as president. The increase of murder from 1989 to 1994 was due to the Nagorno-Karabakh War, which was an ethnic civil war between the Azerians and the Armenians of the Nagorno-Karabakh region of Azerbaijan. This conflict sparked when this region's parliament voted to join Armenia, sparking a violent conflict where the government tried to prevent the separation. The ethnic Armenians of this area gained control of this territory and proclaimed itself an independent state from Azerbaijan. This declaration of independence is not officially recognized by other nations, and the territory dispute is still present even today. A ceasefire was brokered in 1994 by Aliyev, causing a drop-off in murders at this point.
Mexico also went through a number of political changes from the mid to late 1900s. From the 40s through the 80s, Mexico underwent a period called the Mexican Miracle, which was defined as a period of economic and political reform and growth under Lázaro Cárdenas and the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or PIR. Over time, this party became increasingly more authoritative and oppressive, helping cause the ups and downs in the murder rate before 1976. In the 1980s, the first real cracks formed in the PIR's monopolistic position, causing further political and economic unrest, leading to the 1982 crisis where oil prices plunged and the government defaulted on its debt. In 1988, Carlos Salinas de Gortari won the presidency for a left-wing coalition, Frente Democrático Nacional. He moved on to implement reforms to the exchange rate and inflation. Eventually, he led Mexico to sign the North American Free Trade Agreement, which came into effect January 1st, 1994. His actions and those of the political parties before him led to a huge change in democracy score from -6 to 6 from 1950 to 1999, and a steady decline in murder rate, which is likely thanks to the economic and political betterment of Mexico during this time period. In the end, Guatemala, Azerbaijan, and Mexico all showed some level of change in democracy score from the 1950s through the early 2000s. Additionally, murder rate for all three countries decreased over this time period, partially due to these political shifts and some economic ones as well.